I would like to ask you about custody battles.
Sure.
How custody, from your experience as a counselor, how custody battles have impacted on children? And how the Women's Charter should or could be modified, or behavior could be modified to reduce the kind of collateral damage that children face, when actually it's meant to be in the interest of the child.
Absolutely.
All decisions, but in the end, that's not what happens. I don't think anyone intends it that way, but the way it happens, the child, you know, like what Pyongyang you highlighted, the child suffers.
Absolutely.
Right. Could you share some of your own perspectives on that?
Okay. What we do is, in cases of where there's marital dispute, our focus is very child-centric. So more than often, we often tell them that, look, you have all these differences, but you know, at the end of the day, you have this shared entity. So whatever decisions you're going to make, it has to be in the interest of the child. So that is in cases where there's no violence. But in the cases where there is, where the kids have witnessed violence, we know that there is this trauma. And we have actually done group work concurrently with women who were victims of family violence and children, their kids who have actually witnessed their violence. And what is interesting here is that there is a lot of, because of the, like I mentioned earlier, these women who actually come to us, they don't come to us in the early stage, like they have been abused in the first 1 year or something. It's a long time. And similarly, the kids have witnessed that. So what happened is when we do this, and some of these are very young kids, they're as young as 4 years old, and because they're not able to externalize, unlike the adults, because they're able to talk about it through therapy, we are able to, you know, do some healing work and so on. But with these kids, they actually suffer in silence. So sometimes we have to do things like art therapy and so on. So when you talk about the custody, yes. So when this decision is made that, okay, you know, I'm going to have the children and you're going to have the visitation. So like I mentioned earlier, the thing about the visitation is because when especially in an abusive relationship where the violence has been there for a very long time, the women actually sometimes don't allow the husband to have access. That's why, you know, you have this supervised access. We counselors have to sit in the room. You know, the dad has to, he's only able to see the child in our presence because of safety. So in all divorces, as a counselor can tell you this, in every divorce, children do get affected because to them it's, you know, mom is there and dad is here. They go to school and they see at the meet the parents session, the parents are together and they are not. So they come back and they say, but why dad isn't there? But for some reasons, for some very good reasons, especially in an abusive relationship, then this is the best way to go. So what happened here in this custody, especially when there's this maintenance issue, then what the mother does is, your dad is not giving the maintenance, there's no need to see him. So, you know, your dad is not giving money, there's no need for him to pick you up. So this issue about custody, as a counselor, it definitely affects the kids.
But this is the point that you raised earlier, right, about how it affects the child. Yes. Is this your experience as well?
Just the last point you made. Sometimes the problem with the custody battles is, in a dispute, the parties tend to look backwards. You know, and you know, one of the previous chief justices used to say, right, you want to move away from affidavits which are the womb to tomb. So you start from the day they were born. Right? You talk about night feeds, you talk about breastfeeding, you talk about all that all the way, but actually the children are now 10 and 11 years old at the time of divorce. So, you know, what happens in the early days may not be so relevant. So the focus now really is to look to the future arrangements, right? So what will be the best interest for the kids moving into the future, as opposed to focusing in the past, right? And that's really where the courts are looking at now, and there are a whole variety of approaches, right, which the courts look at and which are really child-centric, which helps the parents actually to focus, because the tendency is to focus on their problems, and like I said earlier, they use the children as the pawn, right? And they use that as the bargaining chips and you know, putting each other down, etc. But in that process, they actually forget, right, that the children are affected deeply. And the worst things, I think, you may not see it immediately. It sort of perpetuates itself, right, probably a few years down the road.
Definitely, because there'll be all this, you know, unhappiness, and then, you know, they will use the child against one another. the child would be affected. In fact, like earlier you mentioned, I mean, these kids, when they're young, probably they just internalize all these emotions, and it's only much later when we see them. And you know, sometimes we are working with a 36-year-old man, and what he talks about is a trauma that he went through when he was 9. So we actually have to go back to the 9 year and heal. So all this emotional abuse, or rather emotional state of the child, it all shows up later years in life. And so much so that some of them are not even able to hold relationships when they move
their own
on.
marriages.
In their own
So
marriages,
it's a vicious cycle.
Yes.
Right.
And some of it they learn a behavior. They learn something that, and it's so difficult when they come to us and they have to unlearn it.